We are ready to start with the next talk, which is by Sally Parsloe from the Southern Association for Psychotherapy and Counselling and the Critical Psychotherapy Network. And Sally, what I'm going to do, because it's 15 minutes for the talk and 5 minutes for questions, I'll give you a 3-minute warning before the end of the 15 minutes.
Okay.
So Sally's talk is The Way We Live Now: Fear, Alienation, Passion, Connection. Over to you, Sally.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. So when I was thinking about this idea of the individual and society, two quotations floated into my mind, and it's funny because they've already come up pretty much this morning. But who is society? There's no such thing. Maggie Thatcher, as we all know. And the other one, there's no such thing as an infant. Donald Winnicott. For Winnicott, the infant exists in the baby carer dyad. There's always something with which we're consubstantial, without which we can't survive, and from which emerges our pattern of being in the world. I think this might be true for the individual and society, and that's what I'm going to speak about, just as it is for the baby and the carer. Margaret Thatcher's conviction that there's no such thing as society was the enabler and conclusion of a political philosophy that sought to shift responsibility from the state to individuals, but which concealed a blueprint for an alienated autonomy. This philosophy, predicated on the lie that there was for everyone a reasonable chance of looking after oneself, willfully ignored the material reality of people's lives, and it sought to destroy the substance which holds together those individual men and women of whom Mrs. Thatcher spoke. This substance is bigger than the sum of its parts. This substance is society. Marx warned against establishing society as an abstraction over against the individual. The individual is the social being. Societal eras are sometimes characterized by names. These nomenclatures are attempts to unfold something about the material conditions of a society in which people live. And as therapists, we need to understand these conditions and attempt to locate our clients as individuals in society. And to do so, we need to use a multiplicity of lenses. For example, Robert Snell wrote through art commentary about the Romantic era, Christopher Bollas through a social and cultural lens about the age of bewilderment, Guy Debord through the political about the spectacular age, Manu Bosano through philosophy about the age of stupidity, and Auden through poetry about the age of anxiety. I want to suggest that we live in the age of a particular manifestation of fear and alienation. Freud wrote Civilization and its Discontents after the First World War. The other to another is someone who tempts them to satisfy their aggressiveness on him, to exploit his capacity for work without compensation, to use him sexually without his consent, to seize his possessions, to humiliate him, to cause him pain, to torture and to kill him. The reason we have laws, civilization, society, is to put some sort of brake on the horrors we inflict on each other. We are and should be terrified of each other because of our innate aggression, with only a Fissipar's social deal to give us a modicum of transient basic protection. The social contract based on fear, however, has demonstrably failed, creating more fear. Fear blocks concern, blocks sensitivity to the demand that the existence of the other creates, blocks reflection, blocks the relational gesture and mutual participation, blocks compassion. Aggression provokes defence, and defensive aggression produces hatred and division in ever spiralling circles, so that destruction becomes a way of being or not being. The radically different and transformative response to the other called for by Levinas, for example, the limitless responsibility not to kill, the absolute primacy of that other that stems from their unknowable alterity, seems to occupy a realm of idealism, like the ideas of Simone Weil, noble but unachievable. One need only look around. We live on a planet that, through manic consumption, is becoming no longer tolerable for human existence. The ground on which we stand burns and floods, war slaughters, millions starve, Curable diseases kill because drug companies focus on profit. In the UK, health services are collapsing. Poverty, homelessness, and mental distress stalk the streets. Modern slavery is a lucrative global trade. The poor work for peanuts. Tycoons and tyrants hobnob. They fly in private jets to Davos, bawling from podia about earth-saving leadership to sycophants. Demented, the tycoons believe that they're the masters of the universe rather than slaves to their own megalomania. The narrative is always and only of themselves. It is the ruling order's non-stop discourse about itself, its never-ending monologue of self-praise, its self-portrait at the stage of totalitarian domination of all aspects of life. That's Debord. Debord describes a phenomenon that he calls the spectacle. The spectacle is a state in which everything that was directly lived has moved away into representation. It's the location of false consciousness. Technological representation is not neutral, but a development made inevitable and characterized by the internal dynamics of the spectacle. The spectacle requires there to be separation of human from human and human from its own self. The root of the spectacle is power. The means of communication concentrated in the hands of the administration of the spectacle is unilateral. It passes from a central cog, as if down the spokes of a wheel that are connected all and only to the cog, never to each other. Separation is the alpha and omega of the spectacle, Debord. He speaks of the reigning economic system as a vicious circle of isolation. On this analysis, the spectacle, the reduction of the world to representation, kills the will to action. Activity is permitted only in the service of the spectacle, and it's impossible to escape. The spectacle appropriates everything, including time itself. By abstracting labour and what is produced, people are designated as passive viewer, consumer, and machine, and not in a good way, not in the sense of desiring machine, the creative unconscious described by Deleuze and Guattari, that's always connective, but as alienated spectator. The more he contemplates, the less he lives. The more he identifies with the dominant images of need, the less he understands his own life and desires. Debord. The spectacle creates anti-vitalism, talk that promises everything and produces nothing, the pantomime of passion, a disaster that Kierkegaard saw coming in the present age. Kierkegaard rails against intellectual abstraction that destroys creative passion, and with it the possibility of activity, the consequent loss of individuality, and the rise of calculated mass pretense. This is Kierkegaard in the 1800s. A revolutionary age is an age of action. Ours is the age of advertisement and publicity. Nothing ever happens, but there's immediately publicity everywhere. In the present age, rebellion is of all things the most unthinkable. Such an expression of strength would seem ridiculous to the calculating intelligence of our times. For people, ourselves and our clients, reduced to powerlessness, people surrounded by death, war, illness, exploitation, foreclosed aspiration, economic paucity, grotesque inequality, tycoons, tyrants, and a carefully manufactured imago techno-bureaucracy that has no organ for feeling. Fear atrophies the psyche. Action, rebellion in its true sense, is impossible. The best anyone can do to overcome it, they think, is to join it, and if lucky and sufficiently ruthless, become the tycoon tyrant. Second best, more prevalent, is the attempt to look like the tycoon tyrant, a sort of Dr. Evil's mini-me in a constant stream of envy-eliciting fabrication. This is Debord. The first stage of the economic domination of social life brought about an evident degradation of being into having. The present stage, in which social life has become completely occupied by the accumulated productions of the economy, is bringing about a general shift from having to appearing. All having must now derive its immediate prestige and its ultimate purpose from appearances. Individual reality is allowed to appear only insofar as it is not actually real. Post-structuralism and postmodernism buried modernism, and with it any lingering idea of certainty. Out went universal theories, out went truth, leaving only the representation of power. Deleuze put it, every relation between forces is a power relation. Different ways of representing the world emerge from and within the discourse of power are between different groups. Leotard observed that in the discourse of today's financial backers of research, the only credible goal is power. Scientists, technicians, and instruments are purchased not to find truth, but to augment power. Well, this may be said of any ruling group, politicians, big business, maybe even psychotherapeutic organisations. Unsubstantiated claims, substantiated claims, people don't care. A therapeutic client had made many millions from exploiting a workforce which he despised. He despised also the people who bought his product, and he said he was happy to sell to idiots. He despised his therapists, he despised socialism, the poor, the vulnerable. He dismissed his workforce as barely human. On economic, social issues and politics, he was fixed. He reiterated that he was open to change his view if confronted with persuasive facts, but no such facts could be presented, since the facts he selected as true were only ever supportive of his own brand of thinking. This client's father had experienced persecution in a socialist state and was now dead. The client was devoted to his father's memory. He boasted that he himself had made himself strong from nothing and exclaimed, "No one will ever put me in a labour camp." The persecutory instinct of humanity that Freud described had been suffered by the father of the client. It seemed that this generational trauma motivated the client to try to evade being crushed by persecutory forces, by himself becoming persecutory and acquiring power as money. As Marx put it, the stronger the power of my money, the stronger am I. The more exploitative, insecure, ruthless and divided society becomes, the more people are tied by fear to the treadmill of the acquisition of money. In 1844, Marx wrote, "The need for money is thus the true need produced by the modern economic system." The same observation is made now by Ros Taylor of the LSE Truth, Trust and Technology Commission, who comments that in modern Britain, it's increasingly obvious that only personal wealth ensures you can live and die with dignity. The case study raised questions for me about the job of therapy in the age of fear. The therapist in the case study realised that they were caught up in the desire to change something in the client rather than interpret a political desire. As Marx said, the philosophers have only ever interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Psychotherapy is inevitably a functioning part of the spectacle, an aspect of the service industry. As such, therapists wouldn't be expected to interrogate the function of therapy for society any more than a chambermaid would interrogate the paying guests doing in a hotel room. Therapists would not need to be concerned with the modes of or tension between autonomy and heteronomy, or with any notion of obligation to social justice. Therapists would just deliver a service to a paying customer. Such service, of course, will be delivered dead on arrival, and this is why we need to be vigilant. Organisations are damaged financially and reputationally by high staff turnover and sickness. Psychotherapeutically informed leadership and management serves to preserve and enrich a company's greatest asset. This is the UKCP. In the age of the spectacle, psychotherapy offers to make leaders and managers of us all. Vanity, the engulfing ego, the pumped self is virtue, expressed as assertiveness, productivity, influence, visibility, agency, empowerment, and enrichment. But in this way, I would suggest slaves are made. The website of the UKCP tells us that psychotherapy isn't just two people sitting with a box of tissues, that old chestnut, but psychotherapeutic insights can inform many other areas of life beyond our immediate health for the business sector, education, and policy making. But what are the sources of insights from psychotherapy? If therapy has got a chance of resisting the spectacular charged vortex of slick commercialism, broken connection, usurpation and deadening of experience, if it is to remain a place to explore the confusion of being and dream and come alive, to be in relationship, take responsibility for others as well as ourselves, to let go, it's vital for therapy to join meaningfully in a societal material reality with other disciplines and with itself, asking difficult questions, being awkward, possibly getting annoyed with each other and disagreeing, but connecting as we are, encouragingly, doing here today. So I'm just hoping that some of these thoughts can open a conversation and invite any comments, not so much questions, but just maybe comments or what everybody wants to say.
Thank you very much, Sally.
You.
So,
Can I
Who
say
would
something?
like to continue the conversation? Thank you,
I,
Tony. What would you
I
like
will, yeah. Sally, that was really funny, actually. Thanks. But it's serious as well. But what I noticed was your client has the same view of people as Freud. That people basically are just out to get him and will murder him, will, abuse him if he doesn't abuse them first, in a way. He's taken it a step further. Freud stops at just describing it. Yeah.
I think Freud notices it, doesn't he? He notices it, and he tries to think about ways of how that can essentially be controlled so that we don't just destroy ourselves. But of course, we are destroying ourselves. So I think that's something about what I'm saying, that it doesn't work. So what are we going to do, and what do we do in the therapy room with that?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I think it's very difficult because a lot of these problems sort of beyond any kind of power of the therapeutic encounter itself. When you're talking about, unemployment or climate change, there's so many sweeping issues now. The world is so globalized that it's incredibly difficult on an individual level to. I think that's. I don't think it matters what part of history you're in a way. I think that's always the central kind of schism is, does an individual have that much effect on society? Probably not, in a way. But I think particularly now we're so globalized that it's hard to know, in a way, the effect that therapy can have when you talk about these issues.
I mean, I think in some ways that is one of the manifestations of the nature of how fear is experienced in the world we live in, to some extent, and that and it's also what Kierkegaard was talking about, I think, is that you get so alienated that view that, well, there's nothing you can do about it. And maybe there is nothing you can do, but maybe there is. But it also goes back to what one of the earlier speakers, in fact, what both of the earlier speakers were saying about the strip that is kind of, that I think it's something about the individual and society just not being separate things, and so, for example, that particular client was having a considerable effect on lots of people. And that's why it's so difficult, isn't it, to think in the therapy room about what do you do with that when it comes up. And I know that there's that sort of very important strand that the last speakers were talking about, not really bringing knowledge into it or an agenda. But I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to sit with those things, isn't it?
Would it have been worth saying to him, Sally, that he's a monster? I'm your therapist, you're a monster, you're behaving like a monster towards other people. Would that be worth saying? Why not? He might sue you or he might not see you again, but
I don't know. I suspect that, of course, because of his fixed views, it wouldn't go in. But I think the way through that is to talk really more about the suffering of his father, I think.
Yeah.
To come alongside what the other aspect of it is like, and to sort of, but that's the thing, isn't it, about how it's not about knowing, and it's certainly not about trying to transmit your ideas into someone. I suppose we'd all have different ways of working with that person, wouldn't we? But I there's this inevitable consubstantiality that I feel we work with all the time. That but it's also, isn't it? It's about us and how we're caught up in it. How we get caught up in the alienation and this notion that Debord was talking about we're not. It's like togetherness is almost like sheep, herded into a pen. That's the kind of togetherness that you can achieve. you know, and I often feel that way about, you know, what technology does and how it herds one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sally. That's time now. But again, I think there's some really valuable points being brought up that we can take through the rest of the day. So thank you.